it's my pleasure to introduce Nicolas Maudet, today from Paris, who is known for his work in agent negotiation, social choice, mechanism design, all kinds of things related to methods for coordinating agents, and who has also told me he has adapted his normal material to some of the areas that are of interest in essence, in order to do more with semantic agreement and ontological negotiation. So he's going to talk about negotiation amongst agents, principles, and techniques.
Thanks, thanks, Michael, for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. And so indeed, this is going to be a lecture on some very basic things on negotiation first, but then I will get into more advanced topic, for instance, multilateral negotiation or negotiation on networks. And I have indeed tried to adapt and to ask myself, well, what does it mean exactly to negotiate some meaning? It was not so clear to me at the beginning, and then I came across a couple of works that I think are relevant. So it could be a bit naive, but I'd be very happy to discuss these ideas with you, and I hope it will bring some interesting ideas. So I guess I will start with bilateral, and then the coffee break should occur at the end of part one, around that time. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions, and anything. So first of all, negotiation, you have to know that it's a very huge topic, of course, studied in many fields for many years. One good starting book is the book of Raifa, The Art and Science of Negotiation, in the 80s. Also in many or any AI or multi-agent systems book, you would find some chapters on negotiation. For instance, in the one by Mike Wooldridge and José Vidal, you would have very nice chapters on negotiation. And there are 3 books dedicated to the subject of negotiation with agents, so automated negotiation. 2 books, so one is from the 90s, Rosenstein and Zlotkin, Rules of Encounter. One from Sarit Cross, Strategic Negotiation in Multi-Agent Systems. And the other one is much more recent. It was issued last year, Principle of Automated Negotiations. So, of course, the material that I have is based on some of these books, also different courses that I gave. So, first of all, there is a common distinction that you would find in many of these books between game theoretical approach, where you have mathematical tools as developed in game theory, and you try to analyze with these mathematical tools the interaction. So you have very nice provable properties, very strong assumptions of rationality in particular. We'll discuss that later. But you have a maybe more practical, heuristic-based negotiation where you try to design good strategies in practice, sometimes for specific domains, but not only. More realistic assumptions, but it's, of course, more difficult to guarantee properties. So typically, you would empirically evaluate your approach in that case. And also, I know that or at least last year at the summer school, there were some lectures on argumentation. You have to know that you can combine negotiation and argumentation. It's very closely related, so you can think of bringing arguments during the negotiation that can happen, that can actually improve the negotiation process. And so you have argument-based negotiation, which typically allows arguments in the sense that you would explain why you accept or refuse a given offer in a negotiation. Okay? So that's a very broad overview of the types of negotiation. But first, I will focus on bilateral negotiation. So bilateral means two agents only. It's very simple. It's the basic setting. I will explain the setting, in particular what is an outcome, what are the preferences of agents, because they typically have different preferences, otherwise negotiation is very simple. I will tell you a little bit of the axiomatics of negotiation provided by Nash. He was famous for some other work, but he also did some work on negotiation. And we will analyze together a couple of protocols that I will show you. Very simple protocols, but it gives and it provides the very essential insights into this kind of negotiation. And I will finish with some heuristics. I could do a whole course on heuristics, I guess, but I will just give a very broad overview of it. So, the setting. When we negotiate, you negotiate over an outcome set. Okay? What does it mean? It means that you have different outcomes that can happen. And this outcome set has a structure. But it can be very different, okay? It can be very different. You may take this first example. You want to decide on the next location of the summer school, and the outcome set can be, so each outcome can be a city, for instance, Bali, or you would do that in Moscow, or I don't know, maybe Bali? Okay. So, decided. Take this second example. You have a chocolate vanilla cake to divide, or a carrot cake, and so in that case, that's a division of a continuous resource. An outcome would be, I give 1/3 to guy A, and I give 2/3 to the guy B. Okay? In that case, the outcome is simply a division of this continuous resource. Very different, of course. Consider this third example. You have 4 candies, maybe of different colors, if you want to do it a bit more fancy. And you want to decide on the complete allocation of the resource to the different children. And on that case, the outcome is to give a set of candies to the first child and a different set of candies to the second child. Okay? In that case, all the different outcomes are all the ways that you can allocate and divide these non-divisible candies between the two children. Okay, so it can be very different, and it will make a difference when we will talk about the results that we can ensure. Okay, so what does it mean? First, it means that the outcome set, so the different outcomes that you can have, can be very large. Even in the discrete case, even if each outcome is discrete, not in a continuous case. For instance, if you have G goods, you have A being the number of agents, the power of G outcomes, okay? Because you have to enumerate all the possible ways to allocate the goods. If you take a multi-issue domain like this, you want to consider a package for the next holiday, you want to decide whether you go for 1 week, 2 weeks, the city where you go, so again Bali, or Lisbon, Moscow, or Dakar. You want to decide whether you go to a pension, or the first star hotel, and so on, or a plane, by car. So you want to decide on a package which would be a combination of all these different features, okay? But if you just count how many outcomes you have the Cartesian product of all these sets, so that's already 120 outcomes that you can have, okay? All the different combinations over these features. So this set can be large. Of course, if it's continuous, it can be even larger. So now for the agents. Agents have preferences, as I said at the beginning. They will typically be different, maybe opposite, And this is why they need to negotiate. How do we represent and what kind of preference agents have? Here you have two very distinct ways of representing preference. One is the ordinal preference representation, where you just have an order. So the agent has just a binary relation over the outcomes that you can assess, evaluate, which is typically reflexive, transitive, you can argue about that, and often complete. So assuming that you can compare all the different outcomes. This may not be the case. You can argue about all of this. So the basic preference statement that you can have in that case is the outcome O1 is at least as good as O2 for me. You present that, okay? Just a binary relation, an ordering. But of course, you can also have a cardinal way of representing preferences. So you could express the preference structure as a valuation function, getting from the set of outcomes to some domains of values. And this domain can be of two types. It can be a scale of qualitative values, so very good, good, average, not as good to me, and so on, linguistic terms. It can be quantitative values, okay? It can be the reals, it can be integers, and so on. So you give a value to the different outcomes. People usually like values, but you have to be very careful. Very, very careful. So very often the quantitative values are used, but you really have to think of the meaning of these values. It's a very important issue here. So if I get back to Luce and Raifa, in the 50s, in their book Games and Decision, they had three different ways to interpret these values. They said, so values can be utility terms, but one very distinctive issue is whether you can have interpersonal comparison of utility or not. So what does it mean? Interpersonal comparison of utility means that the value that I give for something can be compared to the value that you give for something. Okay? And this cannot be taken for granted. It really depends on the domains and on different parameters that you may have in the negotiation setting. But if I gave value 7 for this bottle of wine, it doesn't mean that your value 7 would be the same. Okay? Not at all. So we have this, where no side payments are allowed, so no money is involved in the negotiation process. Or second item, you can have utility terms. Interpersonal comparison is meaningful, so you can do this kind of comparison, and you still have no payment allowed. That's usually the least studied setting, because usually when you have monetary terms, so you introduce a monetary value, and it gives you the power to say, okay, because we have this money, we can compare utilities, because in the end, agents will convert in this money their value for these different items. So usually when you have monetary, it's a shortcut, and many economists would argue about this, but to give you a broad idea. So if you have money, then you can, in some sense, do this interpersonal comparison of value. Okay, but that's something you really have to keep in mind, that you cannot take for granted that the values of different agents can be compared, except in some domains where this is an assumption that can be made. I will discuss about that now. So in this book, in the Rules of Encounter, Rosenstein and Zlotkin discussed different domains where you can have different assumptions that you can make on the utility functions of agents, on the preferences. The first one is a task-oriented domain. In that kind of domains, the utility functions of agents is common. So all the agents will have the same utility function. Okay? It's commonly subadditive, meaning what? Meaning that, well, I'll get to that later. Okay, it's not at this point. And agents are only concerned with the tasks that they get. So you have a different sets of agents. They have some tasks to do, and these are the same tasks for all these agents. Robots, for instance, they have to clean some areas, and the values are the same for all these agents. In the state-oriented domain, the utility function is still common to all the agents, but the agents can value the state in general, not just the task that they have to do. So it's a bit more general than this. And in worth-oriented domain, the utility function may be different for the different agents. So it's even more general than this. Okay? So in the first domain, you can make very strong assumptions on the utility function, and then in the worth-oriented domains, you cannot do much assumptions. Okay, so it's usually useful to represent outcomes on a diagram like this, where you have utility function of two agents. This is agent 1, okay? This is the utility of agent 2. And these are two goods, okay, R1, R2, that we have to allocate to both agents, to agent 1 or 2. And these are the utility that they get for getting either R1, R2, or R1 and R2 together. So if they get nothing, they are not happy at all, they are zero utility. If agent 1 gets resource R1, utility is 1, whereas utility of agent 2 for the same item is 3. Okay? If agent 1 gets resource R2, utility is 3, the same for agent 2. And if they get both items together, the utility of R1 and R2 is 7, whereas for agent 2, it's 8. So we can notice here that first thing to notice is that the preference of agents are not additive, in the sense that getting R1 and R2 together brings more value than just getting R1 plus R2, okay? It's more than, so 7 is more than 1 plus 3. And the same for agent 2, it's also super additive, so it brings more value to have the combination of these two items. So it means that you can have a very, if you have to express the preference of agents in that sense, and if if agents have preference over the combination, it can be very complex, just to express the preference of agents, okay? Okay, that was one thing. Now, if I want to draw on this picture the different outcomes of the negotiation, if I want to allocate all the items, and items cannot be shared, then one possible way to allocate is to give nothing to A1 to agent 1 and both items to agent 2. Another way is to do the other way around. Then you could give R1 to agent 1 and R2 to agent 2, or the other way around. So that gives 4 possible allocations that I can draw on this picture. So this one is where I give everything to agent 2, I give everything to agent 1, I give resource 1 to agent 1, and resource 2 to agent 2, that's 1, 3. I give resource 2 to agent 1 and resource 1 to agent 2, 3, 3. 4 different outcomes in this negotiation setting. In some domains, you could also say that you could randomize over the different outcomes. So instead of having a discrete collection of points on this diagram, you have a region, which is typically a convex region, where you could say, for instance, this would be outcome 3 with some probability and outcome 2 with some probability. So you can reach all the different points in this region, and this is what is called a convex outcome set. I will not talk much about this kind of domains, but still I want to mention it because the axiomatics of negotiation provided by Nash relies on this type of domains. Okay, to conclude on preferences, few message and remarks that I want to make. So some of them I already mentioned, but just recap. So ordinal preferences, they would not allow interpersonal comparison of utilities, because in that case, an agent just says, okay, I like this item over this one, but I cannot express anything that could be meaningfully compared between two agents. There is no common value. Ordinal preferences cannot represent intensities, whereas cardinal preferences do. Ordinal preferences can handle incomparability. So I can just decide that my ordering is not complete, and I can say, okay, this outcome O1 is just incomparable to me as with O2. If you have cardinal preferences, you cannot, because you express something in some value and you can always compare these two values. If you have utilities, then you cannot express incomparability. If I want to represent explicitly cardinal or ordinal preferences, it will be the size of the preference structure that you will obtain in the end is the size of the outcome set if you have a cardinal utility. Okay. For each possible outcome, I give a value, for instance, like in the tables that I had. And if it's an ordinal representation, you would have to express all the different comparisons, so that would be quadratic. Some assumptions that are usually made, I will typically make these assumptions, although maybe not all the time, so I will specify on the way. But preferences of agents are common knowledge among the agents, and that's a central point in game theory, that you have full access to the preferences of agents. That's a very strong assumption, of course. And you can provide explicit representation of your preferences. Okay, so you can list. So remember that this can be very large. Remember that this may not be realistic at all to suppose that you can express explicitly your preferences over such a set. But we'll do some assumption. You have to know that there are many, many works on providing more compact representation of preference, either in the ordinal or in the cardinal setting. You have things like CP-nets in the ordinal settings that you may have heard about. You have generalized additive functions, utilities in the cardinal world. So in all these different settings, people have tried to come up with more realistic ways to represent preferences, okay? To encode or to compactly represent the different interactions that you have among preferences. Right, so now if we want to negotiate, in the end we'll get something. We'll get an outcome, we'll agree on something. We'll see later on how the real negotiation takes place with some protocols and so on. But let's assume that we have come to the end of the negotiation, and so we have an outcome. And now we have to say whether it's a good or bad outcome. How do we assess that? So again, it's been very well studied in economics and so on for a long time. And one of the basic notions that you have here is Pareto optimality. So an outcome is Pareto optimal. So let's say it the other way around. So an outcome, Pareto dominates another outcome, O2. So O1 dominates O2 if it's at least as good as O2 for all the agent, and for one of them it has to be strictly better. Okay, so it's an outcome that you would like to, concluding on a non-Pareto outcome is strange, because you could have an outcome which would be better, or at least not worse for everyone, and better for some guys. So that's really something that you want in most negotiation settings, although sometimes it can be discussed. I'll get back to that later. So it's Pareto optimal if it's not dominated by any other outcome. So remember our different outcomes here. In that case, which are the Pareto optimal outcomes, or which is Pareto optimal outcome? What do you think? Yeah. Second, third, and fourth, exactly. So the only one being dominated is this one, O1, because you see that O2 is better for agent 2, and it's the same for agent 1. I thought I had a different picture. Okay, so this one is dominated, and these three other points are not dominated. They constitute what is called the Pareto frontier in this diagram. Okay? This set of points can be very large. Again, it can be a very large set of points. So just talking about Pareto optimal outcomes may not give you much restriction on the kind of outcomes that you want. Okay? Another example, if you have taken from a famous book from Fishburne, if you have a cake, continuous resource that you want to divide between two agents, any cut that you do in that cake is a Pareto optimal outcome. Okay? If I cut the cake here, then if I had instead cut it here, one agent would be less happy. So each possible cut on this cake is a Pareto optimal outcome. So you see that it does not tell you much in the end. Still, that's one of the first and basic notions that you will have. If you have values, you can do much more. You can aggregate values, you can talk about the collective utility of the set of agents, and you can do that in many ways. I mean, if you have values, you can use any aggregation function you could think of. The most simple ones are the utilitarian, so this is called a social welfare function. The most basic one is utilitarian, so you want to maximize the sum of utilities. You may want to maximize not the sum, but the minimum, so the utility of the agent, which is the worse off in the negotiation. This is called the egalitarian, because you want to help the worse off. Or what is called Nash product, and you will understand why in a few minutes, where you want to maximize the product of utilities. So in that case, on our example, which outcome would maximize the utilitarian social welfare here? So you give everything to the second agent. Of course, it's not at all fair, if I can put it this way, but that's the best for the sum. You can just give both items to agent 2. It gives 8. What would be the egalitarian social welfare? Egalitarian social welfare, in that case, would be to give R2 to agent 1 and R1 to agent 2. Okay, give 3 and 3. Any other outcome would give less to one of the agents. And the Nash product in that case would be also the solution, which gives 9. You see that if you do, well, this one is Pareto dominated, and well, this one you have a 0, so the product will be very, very bad. So typically the Nash product is usually seen as a sort of compromise between efficiency and a bit of fairness, because if you have one agent which is very badly served, then his utility is very low and it will damage the product. Which of these notions imply Pareto optimality? Well, not all of them. Not all of them. I can give you a hint. So, egalitarian does imply or does not? Does not. That's the new one. So why? So utilitarian and Nash product does. Why? Because if it was not the case, so if you had an outcome which dominates, then it would obviously give a better sum or product, because it's at least as good for everyone and better for some of the agents. So the sum would be better or the product would be better. Okay? So utilitarian and Nash product imply Pareto optimality. If it was not the case, you would have, by absurdum, you would have a counterexample. But why egalitarian does not? Because you just look at the agent which is the worst off. So an outcome can be egalitarian, optimal for egalitarian social welfare, and give for instance, I don't know, say 5 for agent 1, 5 for agent 2. But if you have a different outcome which gives 5 for agent 1 and 10 for agent 2, this is not better in terms of egalitarian social welfare. They are both optimal in terms of egalitarian social welfare because they both give 5 for agent 1. So it does not imply, in that case, Pareto optimality. Okay? Because you just focus on one agent, the worst off. Sure.
One of the questions here is, you could also ask, is utility an ordinal, an interval, or a ratio quantity? Are you familiar with those terms? Because if it's in order for all three of those to be defined, utility has to be a ratio quantity, because in order for the product to be a meaningful term. But if it's not a ratio property, so if I can't say meaningfully that my utility is twice yours, then the Nash product isn't even defined, right? And likewise, for an interval, I can define the utilitarian or the egalitarian. But in many cases, I don't even have that. My utility might just be an ordinal measure, in which case the only one of those I can define is the egalitarian. Now, I can nonetheless define Pareto optimality based on ordinal, because I can define dominance. So how difficult is it to determine when utility has these various properties?
So that's a very good and difficult question. So first, indeed, as you say, for these different notions, you use different assumptions, indeed. And for the Nash product in particular, we'll get back to that because I will tell a bit more about the axioms that Nash uses, and some of them are directly related to what you say, that you cannot use it if you have variance in the scales and so on. For Pareto, indeed, Pareto is fully defined ordinally, so that's great, and people like it for that as well. Another question related to that? Yeah.
You're totally wrong, because the Nash product is defined as soon as the utility is an integral scale. You have to compare within a particular outcome. So you don't compare between outcomes. If you multiply one scale by a constant for one individual, the product, the relationship between the product is strictly the same. So Nash equilibrium, the Nash product is defined as soon as you have an integral, which is integral scales for utility, which is a normal assumption. Egalitarian and utilitarian pursue both interpersonal comparisons, otherwise they don't work, which is an assumption.
Yes, so I'll come back to that for the Nash axioms, but indeed, utilitarian and egalitarian assumes interpersonal comparison of utility, that's sure. Okay, so in negotiation, you typically have a point, which is the point of disagreement, which is what's going to happen if the negotiation fails. It's, again, a very critical issue, and sometimes it's not so clear what does it mean for people to fail in negotiation. I mean, if you take the recent discussion over the Greek issue and the Greek debt, and I mean, it was not clear to anyone what would happen if the negotiation failed. So, and what would be the value of failing for each party and so on. So that's really something which is central in most negotiations. And it may not be the same for both agents, of course. In negotiation, one central axiom that you have is that agents should be better off engaging in negotiation, and so starting and committing to the negotiation, because otherwise they would stay home and not negotiate at all. So the outcome that they should get in the end should be something at least as good as the outcome of the conflict point. So if here you have a conflict point here for agent 1, this is not individually rational, because there is some outcome that can be worse than what was the case prior to negotiation. Okay, so again, Luce and Raifa in 57, they defined the negotiation set as being individual rationality plus Pareto, so it gives you a subset of the possible outcomes, but you still have many possible solutions. And so axiomatically, Nash, in the 50s as well, tried to define what should be a good solution, a good outcome in that case. And so under some assumption, and in particular the fact that the outcome set is convex, he showed that the unique solution to what he called a bargaining problem must be the Nash product, provided you accept some axioms. And the axioms are the following axioms. So a bargaining problem is a pair of outcome set on different outcomes, conflict point, and you have a Nash bargaining solution, which is O star. So basic axioms, Pareto, and individual non-rationality. And then you have these three additional axioms: symmetry, linear invariance, independence of irrelevant alternatives. So what do they say? I'll give the intuitions. Symmetry says that if they are in exactly the same situations, the two agents should be treated the same. So if you have the same conflict point for both agents, and if for any possible outcome, giving this for agent 1, you have this similar outcome for the other agent, then they are really interchangeable, then the outcome should be similar for both agents. Okay, this one is not really controversial. Linear invariance says two different things: that you have to be independent of the scale. So the outcome should not depend on the scale that you use to represent your utility. So if one agent uses scale 0, 10 to represent your utility and the other one 0, 100, then it should not depend on this scale, whether you give your enter utility 9 for agent 1, utility 50 for agent 2 does not really mean that you are more happy, because in the other case you have a completely different scale. It has to be independent of 0, so meaning that you can translate the scale of utility and would not change the outcome. So if you have an agent which uses 0.9 as a scale, whereas the other one uses 1.10, then you should be able to do this translation without affecting the outcome. Independence of scale, independence of 0. And maybe the most controversial axiom is the independent of irrelevant alternatives, IIA, which also comes in different forms. I mean, this kind of ID comes in different forms in social choice, in voting, and so on, in different theorems of voting, like Arrow and so on. So here, the meaning is that if the outcome that the Nash product would select is in some region of your outcome set, okay? If you restrict the outcome set to this region, okay? So basically you delete some outcome which are not in the region where the outcome set lies, then it should not affect the result, okay? So suppose you have an outcome set like that, okay? You have your solution chosen by Nash is here, so it's in a given subregion. This axiom says that I could apply the same negotiation, take the same negotiation setting, but just within this subregion, and I would still get this outcome, okay? So I just delete some outcome which are irrelevant because they are not part of the region where the outcome set lies. Okay, this is controversial, and I'll tell a bit more about that later. Okay, so again, what Nash showed is that if you accept this 5 axiom, then the Nash product is the unique solution guaranteeing these 5 axioms. Okay, now a bit more practical. I will start to talk about some protocols, and we'll discuss about some properties of these protocols. So what is a protocol? First, a protocol is a way to define the rules of interactions. So who can say what at some point of the interaction? You can have different ways of handling this interaction. You can allow simultaneous moves, you can have sequential moves, and so on. Given that, an agent has a strategy, which is an individual behavior, okay, which move to select among all the legal ones. The protocol gives me the legal moves, and the strategy tells me among those ones, which ones, or which one, it has to be deterministic usually, should I pick. What are the properties that we usually want for protocols and strategies? You can find that in different domains as well. Usually you like the negotiation to terminate, otherwise, but I mean it's not just fun, it can be the case that your protocol does not really define a proper way to concluding the negotiation, and you can have some deadlocks and so on, some loops. You would like to get to a guaranteed agreement, not on the conflict point. That's better. You should provide an efficient outcome, for instance, Pareto optimal outcome, as we discussed. And usually, you would like the protocol to provide a stable outcome. Meaning what? Meaning that one agent would not have an incentive to change his strategy, given the strategy of the other. So, for instance, you could have a symmetric Nash equilibrium. So, assuming that agent 1 uses strategy S1, I think, or S1, then agent 2 cannot be better off using a different strategy than S. S, okay, his strategy. Okay, otherwise he would have an incentive to deviate. Or if it's sequential, you want to be in what is called a subgame perfect equilibrium, which I will also illustrate in a few minutes. So recently in the domain of mechanism design and so on, some notions have occurred, and one of the notions that was very successful is the price of anarchy. So the price of anarchy is a notion which tries to quantify how far in terms of efficiency you are from an optimal solution in some equilibrium state. The price of anarchy technically says, I will take the worst possible equilibrium solution and I will measure how far it is from the optimal solution. It's called the price of anarchy because this equilibrium state is a state where you could end in some negotiation scenario, and it's equilibrium, so the agents will stick in this state, but still it can be far from the optimal solution. Okay, you have different notions related to this, but this notion is very successful in assessing what does it take to let agents negotiate by themselves, as opposed to solving centrally the problem and getting the optimal solution, if we can. Price of anarchy, I will also illustrate this. Okay, the most basic protocol that I will illustrate today is the monotonic concession protocol that you would find in most handbook on negotiation. It's a very simple protocol which is based on simultaneous offers. So it will go round by round. Agents will do offers simultaneously. So to round 1, agent 1 and 2 will do offers. Round 2, agent 1 and 2 will also do offers. The offers are assumed to be in the negotiations set to start with, and this OI-T, OJ-T will be the offers made by agent I or agent J at round T. in the initial round, agent make the offer that they like, and then they must do one of these two actions. Either they stick to the previous offer, or they make a concession. And what is a concession? A concession is an offer which will give the other more utility. This is how it is defined in this protocol. And when do we find an agreement? An agreement is found when, for at least one agent, the order made by the other guy is at least as good as its own current offer. So, agent I, current offer OIT, okay, and the other guy propose this offer, and it's at least as good, so that's an agreement, or the other way around. It can be that both conditions are satisfied, meaning that in that case they both made a concession which is satisfied for the other one, and then in that case you would typically flip a coin if both agents are in this situation. Then you have a disagreement if both agents stick to their previous offer. Okay, if they both decide to stick to previous offer, then you have disagreement. How should agent play this game? Zeuthen proposed the following strategy. It's based on the notion of the willingness to risk conflict. So it will compute a value, zi of t, which says how much I would lose if I was to get out, or if differently, how much I would lose if the negotiation would stop at that point, and if I would lose the negotiation at that point. Okay, so how is it defined? It's the ratio of the utility given by my offer over the offer of the other one, minus the offer of the other one, over the value of my offer. And it's 1 if my current offer is 0, otherwise it's not well defined. And then from this notion, the strategy is as follows. You compute your willingness to risk conflict. You compute the willingness of risking conflict of the other one. Of course, this assumes that you can do that, so you know the preferences of others. Again, strong assumption. Then the one with the smallest value should concede. And what is a concession? It's the minimal concession which would make the z of the other guy become smaller than your willingness to risk conflict. Okay, and before we go to coffee break, I will illustrate a bit on this example. Okay, so I will need the board, but I'm fine. I can just yeah. Okay, so this is a negotiation situation. You have two robots. They have to clean this area, which is shown on the screen. To do that, they have to get to these different locations. They don't need to get back to their initial location. So robots are R1 and R2. Okay. The cost of moving from their a location to a different location is shown with the value on the H. So for instance, to clean A, robot 1 could just move to A and it would cost 2. Okay. If agent 1 had to clean everything alone, it would cost him ABC. So you have to compute the shortest path. So the shortest path is actually difficult. So 2, 3, 2, 2. So that's 9. The cost of cleaning everything alone for robot 1 is 9. For robot B, for robot 2, cleaning everything alone can also be with cost 9. You clean B, get back here, so that's 4. 6, you clean C, and 9, you clean A. Okay, so cleaning everything together, we'll try to use the same. Cleaning A, cleaning B, cleaning C, cleaning AB, AC, cleaning BC. So the cost of cleaning everything is 9. And to compute utility, we will make the difference between cleaning everything alone and doing the task that we are allocating. So utility in that case would be 0. But if I had to do, for instance, nothing, the cost is 0. And so my utility is the difference between what I would do if I was alone. So that would cost me 9. So my utility would be 9 here. Okay? If robot 1 has to clean area A, that's cost 2. If robot 2 has to clean area A, that's cost 5. Okay, and so here this is 7 as utility, and here this is 9 minus 5, that's 4. Okay? And we can do the same. We can do the same for all the different situations. We'll do that for the 3 first lines, and then I will just complete. So B alone, robot 1 can just get to B, cost 4. Okay, so that's utility 5. And B alone for robot 2, that's 2. So that's 7. C alone for robot 1, 5. And for robot 2, 2. And last one. So AB, if robot 1 had to clean AB, it could do with cost 7. So utility 2. And robot 2 could do AB with utility 7 as well, I think. Yeah, no better way. Utility. Okay, I will just conclude. I think it's faster than checking on the notes. So AC for robot 1, that's cost 5, I think. And AC for robot 2, 5. And then the last one, BC for robot 1. So BC can be done in 8. Is there a better way? No, I think 8 is the shortest path. You tell me if you find a better way. And BC for robot 2, 6. Okay, I'll just check. 86. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so what is the outcome set of these different situations? So here, an allocation of task is to say, okay, robot 1, you will do that, and robot 2, you will do that. And robots have to allocate themselves this different task. So one possible outcome is robot 1, I do nothing, and the other one, you do everything. And this is an outcome which gives 9, 0. Okay. Another possible outcome is to say, okay, robot 1, you do, okay, where shall I do that here? You do A, I do BC, then that's 7, and BC for agent 2 is 3. And so on and so forth. I can list the different situations, the different outcome that could occur in this negotiation. So we'll do it here. BAC, so that's 5 and AC 4. C AB, which would give 4 and 2, right? ABC 2, 2, 7. ACB, which is 4, and B, that's 7. BC A, which is 1, and A 4. And finally, ABC and nothing. Zero 9. Okay. So among those different outcomes, some of them are clearly Pareto dominated. For instance, if you take this one, 4, 2 is dominated by, for instance, 5, 4, so it shouldn't be considered in negotiation. Just to understand why this is the case. So this would be the situation where agent 1 would go to clean area, area C, whereas agent 2 would clean area A and B. So actually R1 would have to go in this region to clean C, and agent 2 would have to clean A and B, okay? But it's dominated by the situation where maybe a better way to see the domination is by swapping. Yeah, for instance, dominated by B and C. So they could just swap. Instead of going to C, R1 could just go to B, and this is much better for both of them if they swap these two tasks. Okay, so it's dominated clearly. So we have a couple of dominated situations, like this one, 8, 3. Is there any other one? -3. No, that's about it, I think. BAC. Yeah, sure. Sorry, yeah. Exactly, yeah. Thanks. By 4 and 7, exactly. So we have some remaining outcomes, and agent would negotiate with these outcomes, okay? I'll just show the beginning of the negotiation, and we'll do the coffee break and move to this later. So remember that using Zeuten's strategy, the outcome that they should first propose is the better for them. So A1 would propose nothing, I do nothing, you do everything, and robot 2 would propose, okay, I do nothing, you do everything. And that's where we start to. In that case, of course, if we compute the willingness to risk conflict, it would be the same for both of them. It would be 1. By computing the ratio that I showed before, so they should both concede. They should concede minimally, and so agent 1 would say, okay, I'll do something, I'll take reagent A, you take BC, it gives our robot R1 7, and the other one utility 4. The other one will also concede and say, okay, I'll take B, you do AC. In that case, for robot 2, that's 3 and 7 for agent 2. If you now compute the willingness to risk conflict, in that case, it will be 7 minus 4 divided by 7, so 3 over 7 and 4 over 7 for the other agent. And so which agent should concede in that case? The agent which had the lowest Z, indeed. So this is agent A. He would do another concession, which in that case happens to be the same as the one proposed by other agents. And they would conclude on this allocation of resource. R1 does AC, R2 does B, okay, in 2 steps of negotiation. So again, first step, both of them conceded, then only agent 1 conceded. Why? Because he was in a situation where he had less willingness to risk conflict, so more things to lose if the negotiation failed, so to speak. Okay, and I'll continue on the properties of this protocol after the break. Is it? But that's no. I was confused. I still have 15 minutes. Right, great. Oh, okay. No, sorry. It was just my jet lag and caffeine in my blood is amazing. Okay, excellent. So, sorry if I was maybe rushing a bit. So, properties of monotonic concession protocol and Zeuten. So, the termination is guaranteed, and agreement is also guaranteed because there is always at least one agent which is willing to concede. Okay, we have no situation where both would not be willing to concede by definition of this Z notion. Okay, maybe both of them want to concede, maybe only one, but it cannot be the case that neither of them want to concede. So there is no conflict that we can have. Because we assume that the offers are in the negotiation set to start with, then we have Pareto optimality. But we have a stronger result that the outcome will maximize the Nash product. Okay, that's nice. Maybe we knew already this by the Nash characterization result that I showed, but you have to be careful. The domain that I discussed here is not a convex domain, so it's not directly applicable, the results that I showed before. It's not directly the case that you can just say, okay, we knew it because it's given by the Nash result. And how about stability? In fact, the strategy is not in symmetric equilibrium. Why? Because there is a little glitch in the last step of this protocol. It could be the case that in the last step you have the same value for the willingness to risk conflict. And so if this is the case, and this is the last step of the situation, you are in a game theoretical situation, a bit like a game of chicken, if you know this kind of situation. You can say, okay, I know that both of us must do a deviation, but I will let the other one do this. And I will actually be better off if only the other one does this situation. Just like in this game of chicken, you have this from the movie with Marlon Brando, where these cars run. No, not like this. In parallel, and they have to, not to be the chicken, they have to be the last to jump out of the car. Okay, and it's this kind of situation where if you can convince the other one that you will not do this move, then you can win, because you say, okay, I will be the last to do this. You have to deviate, because otherwise you will lose, and you don't want to get to the conflict point. Okay, we can extend the Zeuthen strategy by allowing for this last tiny thing in the last step to get the stability. So you can have a mixed kind of strategy where you randomize over the outcomes. But actually, a more simple one-step protocol is possible. You can just assume that agents make a single offer, and you say that the protocol will select the one maximizing the product of utility. And if you do that, the best strategy would be to select the one that gives you the best utility. So you can, knowing this, you can get to a much simpler protocol. But of course, the nice thing of the monotonic concession protocol is that you see step by step how you approach this final outcome. Another very famous protocol is the alternating offers proposed by Rubinstein. It's a sequential protocol as opposed to a simultaneous one, like the previous one. In that case, sorry, you have an agent starting with a given offer, and in the next round, the other agent can either accept or make a counter offer. So either you accept, or you say, I don't accept, but I will make a counter offer. Some water. And in the definition of the protocol, you have a discount factor, so you take time into account. And so negotiation is time constraint. And if the outcome is accepted at some time t, then you will apply a discount factor which will increase with time. So it's better to terminate very quickly the negotiation, otherwise the outcomes will lose value as time passes in the negotiation. If you know all the preferences of agent, this is a sequential protocol, so you can apply backward induction to solve it, like a min-max, if you know everything. So suppose you have, well, first let's think about it for a while. If you have agents which are patient, so time doesn't play any role here, and suppose that the number of rounds is known in advance. Okay? So you know that you have 8 rounds in the negotiation. What's the situation? The situation is that actually the last agent has all the power, because you can refuse all the time, and then you know that you are the last agent to make the last offer. Okay? If you know in advance the number of rounds. And so what's the best strategy for this agent? It's very simple. You always refuse everything, And then in the last step, you can say, okay, now we get to serious things. You have to sit down, and I have this to propose to you. And what is this proposal? I take everything, basically, and I give you epsilon, because I'm very gentle with you. This is actually an ultimatum game, because you have just one step, the other one can just accept or just refuse. If you refuse, you get to the conflict point. This is well studied in game theoretical situation. This is called the ultimatum game. And this is what game theory predicts, is that you should offer everything for me, nothing for you. You should accept, because otherwise you get to conflict. I'll take everything. I'll get back to that later again. If the number of rounds is not known in advance, suppose agent 1 uses this strategy. You always propose, I'll take everything, I'll give you some epsilon, and you always refuse the offer of the other. What is the best response of A2 to this strategy? Well, maybe it was. Well, in that case, the best response is that if I always refuse, we'll get to the conflict point. So A2 will have to accept at some point. And there is no reason to accept later than earlier, so I will accept what you propose in the first round. So immediate acceptance of any offer is actually a Nash equilibrium if A2 knows that the other one has this strategy of always proposing the same kind of reasoning. Okay, I said before that it's actually a kind of game because of its sequential nature that you can analyze based on backward induction. So just to illustrate, if you're not familiar, but I think all of you are. Suppose you have three possible outcomes, O2, O3, O6. I don't know if this corresponds to the, well, I did not give numbers. So anyway, so you have the O2, it's 7, 3, O3, 4, 5, 4, and so on. So in the first level, agent 2 make an offer, either O2, O3, or 6, then the other one can either accept or make a counter offer. So B will make a counter offer here, and then A will make, well, either accept or make a counter offer, and so on. There is a discount factor here, which is 0.5, because you see that if B accepts in the first round, that's 7-3, but if O3 is proposed in round 2, and if A accepts in round 2, that's O3, but divided by 2. That's 2.7 and 2. So it's been discounted in this negotiation process. And you can do the same if you know the discount factor. You can just compute all the tree, and then you do backward induction. So how do you do that? You reason here, you say, okay, if I'm here, then I'm better off, of course, selecting this. Then, so this is A, B, A. So if A is here, you would have to select between this outcome and this outcome. So either accepting here or counter proposing. Okay, but this one gives 1, this one gives 2.5, so you would pick this one. You do the same here. So for each level, you can have the best outcome, the best action, and you retrieve. So when it's thick, it's the action which is selected, and you get to this solution, which is actually, yeah, proposing O3 and accepting directly 5, 4. So that's the solution which would be given by solving backward induction type of reasoning. Okay, I think I will stop. Okay, I think I'll start again. So, just before the coffee break, we discussed about the alternating offers protocol, which is a sequential protocol. I just showed how it could be solved by backward induction techniques easily, but of course, assuming that you know all the preferences and utilities of agents. So that's one of the very strong assumptions, as already said. And I would like to conclude with some words of cautions. When we discuss all these game theoretical notions, it's been very well documented now that when people actually do negotiate or are in this situation, they do not really follow the things that are usually prescribed, or yeah, they are not really rational in the sense that they are expected to be. So take for instance the ultimatum game again. So what it is, you just have one agent proposing an offer, for instance dividing a pie, to another agent, and the other agent has the possibility to either accept or refuse. So game theory tells us take everything, propose basically nothing, epsilon, to the other one. He will be happy anyway, he cannot do anything else. Then if he refuses, he gets 0. So in real life, that's not what happens. And in the field of behavioral economics, which is now really well established, they have done many studies about that, and usually offers are around a 60-40 division. Of course, there is behind this there is notion of reputation, of fairness, of providing something which is fair enough for the other ones, and many notions are human, in the human nature, that you can have social context and so on. Another one which is quite striking actually is known as the centipede game. Here, suppose you have candies to share and you have this protocol, a very simple protocol. And the protocol is like that. You have two agents, they will play in rounds, and agent I, so in each turn, can either take 1 or 2 candies. But the thing is, if you take 2 candies, it will stop the protocol. Okay? So you can, if you take 1 candy, you move to the next agent, and the other agent can take 1 or 2, and it gets back to agent 1, it can take 1 or 2, and so on. When you take 2, that's the end of the protocol. Okay? So if you think about this and try to see what should be the outcome of this game, maybe with 4 candies, I can draw it, I guess. So let's start with agent 1. This is choice point for agent 1. Can take 2, okay, or 1 candy. If I take 2, utility is I have 2, and the other one, protocol is terminated, so utility of the other one would be 0. If I take 1 candy, then it will be a choice point for agent B. If agent B takes 2, the protocol is terminated, gives me 1 because I have taken 1, and 2 for agent 2 is taken 2. Okay, so A. if A now takes 2, that's 3, 1. Tell me if I am wrong. If B takes 2 now, so that's A took 1, 2, 3, so no, that's not correct. 2, 2, yeah, no, 2, so 2, so B is here. Okay, so 3, 1, that's the end, okay, and B could take 2 here. So, yeah, I was assuming we have just 4 candies, so that's why this is now the end of the protocol, I guess. Yeah, so there's no 2-2 situation. I'm now confused. Yeah, there should be 2-3. Yeah. Yeah, there is, yeah, could be 1 candy, so that's 1, yeah. So that will be the end here. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, so A would take this one anyway. Okay. Okay, I don't need this step anymore. So if you analyze this, so B would say, okay, what would A take? If I give A the choice, he would take in the last step, he would take the 2 candies, okay? So he would take 3, 1. So B would say, okay, I'll take now the 2 last one, it will take me. But A will reason the same, okay? And say, okay, if I'll give B the choice, he will take the 2 here, because he knows that I would take the last 2 here. And if that's the case, then I'm better off it's better than 1, taking the 2 first candies, okay? And so, if I apply backward induction on this, then, well, A should take the 2 first candies and end of the protocol. And that's the same if I have 100 candies. So if agents really reason like this, all the way to the bottom of this tree with 100 candies, can be a big centipede, hence name of the game, then the rational move should be to take the 2 first candies. And so the allocation would be 2 candies and 0 candies for another one. That's surprising. Yes. Tell me.
Surprising, but doesn't it end up being a sort of reductio ad absurdum against game theory? That is, yeah. I would reframe the game saying, I mean, I'm A at the very beginning, and I have a choice between 2 policies. I'm either going to try to take 1 all the time and hope that my counterpart takes 1 all the time, or I'm just going to take 2 at the beginning and end the game. Now, if there's 100 candies in the pool, taking 2 at the beginning gives me 2, gives you 0. But if we both play the other policy, then I get 50 and you get 50. And with that choice, the answer is obvious. I mean, one policy clearly dominates.
True. Okay, so that's for the backward induction, and perhaps even more surprising. I don't know. So in their work on reason-based choice, Tversky and colleagues actually showed that many principles were involved in human decision-making, but in particular 2 principles. One is the dominance effect, and the other one is the compromise effect. And the dominance effect is like that. Suppose you have two alternative O1 and O2, okay, only these two. And they are, suppose these are two criteria. So for you, this is quality and price maybe, and they are equally good, okay? They are not Pareto dominated. One is better on one criteria, the other one is better on one criteria. So if I gave this to many people, maybe half of them would choose O1, half of them would choose O2, okay? But then, if I introduce a third option, which is dominated by O1, but not by O2, okay, it's Pareto dominated by O1, but not Pareto dominated by O2, then there is a very large amount of decision maker who would choose O1 on the basis that they have now an alternative they can compare O1 to, and they can give a reason why they prefer O1. They prefer O1 because it's better than O3. They see it. They see that O1 is better than O3. But they don't see such a justification for O2. And it's massively documented in Dan Ariely's book called Predictively Irrational, where he has many examples of such non-rational kind of behavior. They have an experiment where they show pictures of people. So they first show two pictures of, let's say, good-looking guys, A and B, okay? And in one experiment, they had a third, say, A prime guy, which is about the same as A, but they, with Photoshop, they sort of made the guy a bit less good-looking. They did some Photoshop things, okay? So that's A, but not as good as A, okay? And they have the same with B. They have a B and a B prime. And if they show the set A prime, A, then people would massively choose A because they have this A prime they can compare to. If they give the same A, B, B prime, then people would massively choose B because they have this B prime they can compare to. So that's a very compelling, apparently, way and mechanism that people use for reasoning. That's really something that gives reasons to their decision making. Again, documented in many different situations. And I find it very interesting and not so well studied in our field so far. Another one is the compromise effect. So, yeah, I'll get back to that later. The compromise effect is like this. You have O1 and O2. Again, it's not clear which one should be the best between the two, but now you introduce O3 here. And now O1 becomes much more attractive on the basis that it's a compromise between O2 and O3. You see that it lies right in between, so you say, okay, maybe this one is better on this criteria, maybe this one is much better on this criteria, but then this one becomes sort of compromise between the two. Nothing has changed. I mean, nothing has changed between these two, but just the fact that you just add this makes this one more attractive. It's the compromise effect, and it's also been very well studied. If I get back to the different axioms that we discussed before, it's clearly contradicting things like independence of irrelevant alternative, because here you have a choice set where you have O1 and O2. If I have this choice set, I would choose equally likely O1 and O2, and I add O3, and this is irrelevant, supposedly. And so if it's irrelevant, it should not affect the choice. But by adding this, I completely affect the choice that I made between O1 and O2. So that's contradicting the irrelevant alternative, independence of irrelevant alternative. Okay, so those were 3 examples that I wanted to give because, yeah, they are a bit maybe striking and they are obvious, but there are plenty of other situations where the assumptions that we make in this area are not fully supported, at least for humans. And of course, in some situations it can be the case, but in different situations it may not necessarily be the case. So in practice, if you don't have this full knowledge of utility, perfect rationality, and so on, you're actually playing a game with incomplete information. So you don't really know the preference of the other, you don't really know the strategy of the other, whether he's rational or not. And so what do you do in that case? Well, you will rely on more heuristic-based techniques. So you will specify a high-level behavior, and you will adapt to different parameters of the negotiation setting. So for instance, time, proposals of the other, and so on. And you can get to opponent modeling. So learning techniques in negotiation to actually try to build a model of the opponent. So how does he play? What kind of preference does he have? Is there a deadline for him or not? And so on. It can be very complicated based on different learning techniques and so on. I'll give just a few examples here of very basic notions. First, you can have boolware agents, so based on deadlines. If you have a deadline, you have different kinds of behavior. You can basically make very slow concessions at the beginning, and then when you get to the end, like on eBay typically, you have the concession curve which goes like that, exponential increase. Or you can, the other way around, concede in the first round and then try to stick to your reserve price and so on. So these are very simple, time-dependent tactics. Of course, you can vary as you like. But in negotiation, what is difficult is to know what is a concession for the other one. And if you don't know the preference of the other one, remember in the monotonic negotiation protocol, to compute the Z, of course, you had to know the preference of the other one. What if you don't know this preference? Then you have to sort of guess what is good for the other one, what is a concession, and it's not so simple. There is a principle which is used in different versions, but the idea is not so difficult. The idea is that you will actually try to find an offer which is close from the other agent offer. So you're in the negotiation process, you make an offer, the other one makes an offer, you will make a counter offer, but you will try to make this counter offer acceptable for the other one. And if you don't know the preference, the only thing that you have available is this offer that the other one just did. So what would you do? What you would do is that you will search an offer which would be typically close from your. Sorry, I'm just moving to. So suppose. So this is a curve of ISO preference, meaning that suppose you have 2 criteria, okay, criteria 1, criteria 2, so I don't know, price and quality, for instance. And these are different options that I have. And suppose these are equally good for me, okay? They lie on the same curve. So my preference curve is like that, meaning that all these options are equally good for me. Now I have the other agent. So suppose I did propose, in the first round I did propose that. Now the other agent, in his round of the negotiation, maybe proposed something, I don't know, here. Okay? So that's the proposal of agent 2, let's call it A04. Then what could be a reasonable heuristic? It could be to say, okay, I will search one of the options which for me would give the same, okay, but which is not too far from the option, from the outcome which is proposed by the other one. So the other one proposed this one, okay. Maybe if it's here, it's not too far, okay, because this one is much further on this criteria. So maybe if I propose this one, there is a chance that the other one would accept because it's not too far from his option. Okay, this kind of principle that you can have. So this is just based on the outcome space, but you can have a much more complicating similarity computation. For instance, in this work, Farentin and colleagues defined similarity measure based on the semantics of the offers. So for instance, it was a multi-domain issue where you would discuss, I don't know, holiday package and so on. You can have something with colors, something with a city that you want to visit and so on. And computing similarity in that case amounts to compute similarity in terms of how far it is from the offer that the other one just made. For instance, if he proposed somewhere in Europe, maybe the proposition that I would like to do is also somewhere in Europe because I infer that it's close for some notion of similarity, semantic space, and so on. So once you have a notion of similarity, you can compute this similarity amongst offers, and you can try to seek among the offers which gives you the same utility, the one that is most similar to the other agent's previous offer. Okay. Again, similarity can mean many different things depending on the context, either based on the meaning of the offer or just on the position in the outcome set. So in practice, people do implement strategies and they do test it. In different competitions, in automated negotiation, you would find this. So just to give you a couple of pointers, there is, I'm not sure both of them are still alive, but you have two competitions. One is ANAC, automated negotiation agents competition. One is STAC, trading agent competition, where you also have auctions and so on. And people typically submit strategies and so on, and they have competitions in different domains, and then you win or lose depending on how well you do with your agent. You have many papers and even books analyzing the best strategies of agents in this situation. You have a book by Michael Wellman and colleagues. Maybe there is another one more recent. You also have this nice platform developed at Delft. This is called the Genius platform, where you can easily test basic strategies. You have a nice graphical interface And you see how agents would make the offers in the space of negotiation and so on. So that's good to know also for teaching. That's very useful. Okay, so I have now about an hour remaining. I would like to talk about two things. One is multilateral negotiation, and the other one is negotiation about meaning. And as I said at the beginning, I came across a couple of works, and then maybe you would find it, useful. So multilateral means that now we do not have just two agents, we have more than two agents, which make things much more difficult, because in a two-agent setting, a protocol is more or less clear. You can have sequence of A, B, and so on, or simultaneous offers and so on, but
and also an idea of the other robot.
Is it here, or?
One of them was saying something you can't hear because there's no sound, but one was saying Bolima, and the other is pointing to the object that he thinks is Bolima, and then the other says, no, this is not Bolima. Okay, that's Bolima. So this is a language game. Now, you say this is a failed language game. It's true. But you see, a failure is just an opportunity for learning, right? It's an opportunity for negotiating, for creating new concepts, new words. So they keep doing this for a while, and of course I'm going to show an example of a successful
Maybe
game.
they can do a trick.
And while I'm doing this,
Connecting your audio.
you'll see on the left side there, this is what one robot is seeing, and on the right side is what the other
It's the
robot
movie
is
that
seeing.
they are playing in the other
Maybe
room.
I can
Yeah.
get a little sound. Okay,
I mean, I
so
can turn the
we
volume
play a
down
game again.
here.
And notice that the two robots never see the same thing, right? Which is a very important problem in communication. So they again look around, they look at the other because there's no point to talk when there's no other robot. Now one said
I don't think
Bolima
it's-
again. Now they should be able to figure it out. So yes, he points to the right object, and the other robot is going to be happy. Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay, so this was Lux still presenting this. I apologize for those who have seen this a zillion time already. Where is my slideshow now? So, this kind of experiment, you define a game. I will show you.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
And then what you will record is the.
So, suppose we have a mediator.
And you will record the rate of success.
A protocol could be like this. It's been proposed by Klein, I think. It's called a single text mediated protocol, and this is as follows. Suppose you have some k value k fixed a priori, then you have a simple loop where the mediator would propose an offer, O, and then agents could vote on O, either accept or refuse. If all agents accept, then the current offer becomes this O, okay, and we move to the next step. And you continue until you reach the end of the loop. So the protocol will return the last offer which is accepted by all agents. It will basically start with an offer and perform Pareto improvement. Why? Because to be agreed upon, the next offer has to get the acceptance of all agents. If one agent sees that he's not better off, or at least as good with the next offer, he would just veto it, and one agent is enough to block the improvement. So yeah, so is the protocol guaranteed to reach a Pareto optimal outcome? What do you think? Well, actually, no, because you have this value k, and you are not sure that within k step you would reach the Pareto frontier. So suppose you have two steps, well, you start from this value. So the mediators first say, okay, I propose this. Okay, they say yes because they don't have anything so far. Then the mediator says, okay, now I would propose this. Agents, or here I just have two agents per picture, of course, but it's multilateral, so imagine you have thousands of agents. They all say, okay, nice. So this is an improvement. And now we have the second step, for instance, going here. But if you just have two steps, maybe you do not get to the frontier. Okay? So you cannot guarantee it. And is it guaranteed to stop when you have reached a Pareto optimal outcome? Then yes, because if it's Pareto optimal, then moving to another one would make one agent less happy and it would oppose in the negotiation. It would veto it. So this protocol may be problematic in some context. First, it requires a mediator, and it's not always possible. There's a fringe attraction. It can require many rounds of communication from all the agents to the mediator, and it can reach an outcome, of course, with very low social welfare. You don't even know whether you get to Pareto optimality. If you allow enough steps, you will get to Pareto optimality, but maybe with very low social welfare. So some extensions have been proposed to try to address this. For instance, meta-heuristic techniques to avoid local optimal, and also learning techniques for agents. I will say a bit more, well, maybe you can say that this is not really negotiation, because we have a mediator. Doesn't sound like a proper negotiation where a really agent just do by themselves and autonomously negotiate contracts. So I will say a bit more about what is called contract-based negotiation. It takes inspiration from the contract net protocols, and the idea is a bit the same as the one that you had before with this single text mediated protocol, except that you don't need a mediator. So you start with an initial allocation, and then agents will autonomously negotiate among themselves. So maybe in a pairwise fashion, maybe in a group of 3 agents and so on. But the idea is that locally they will agree on some contract. This contract will take the negotiation to a new state of affairs, and then from this we will get to a new state of affairs, and so on and so on. So each of this contract or deal will move to one allocation to another allocation. You may want to include money and payments. I will talk about that later. In that case, rationality of agents will be that they will accept to move to the next allocation if what they gain in terms of utility is higher than what they have to pay in terms of payments. Okay, for instance, you propose me to move from this allocation where I have 2 of utility to this one where I have 10, but I have to pay 3 for that. That's fine because I have 8, I gain 8, and so I'm happy to pay up to 8 minus epsilon to move to this allocation. So money is a way to transfer utility and to smooth the process. And what is interesting is that you can reason about the different kind of deals that you have, different kind of contracts that you can allow among your agents. Remember that here typically you have many agents, so the way you will define your protocol will be to say, for instance, I just allow agents to discuss 2 by 2, or I will just allow agents to exchange one resource over another one, or I will just allow one agent to give one resource to another one, things like that. So it gives strong constraints on the protocol. So you can allow the exchange of a single resource, you can allow the swapping of 2 resources among agents, you can allow anything as long as only 2 agents are involved, or you can allow exchange among agents if it's on a network. And so given that they are neighbors, they constitute a clique, you can have exchange among them. Well, this is based on networks. I will talk about networks later. So, and you can also have hypotheses on the preference structures of agents. Monotonicity is one of them, but you can have superadditivity and so on, as we mentioned at the beginning. So, big picture, many agents, constraints on the way they can deal with them, contracts, and assumptions that you can have on preferences. Now, I will take an example, maybe it's the most basic one, to illustrate this kind of approach. In economics, this is called the house market. And what is the situation? You have n agent, the same number of resources, and you have to allocate 1 resource per agent. Okay, this is called the house market because you typically have 1 house to start with. You don't have 2 houses, and you can just deal a different house, then you have to sell yours and so on. And agents have preferences over resources. In that case, it will be a very simple preference. It will be just an ordering, a full ordering, so a linear ordering of the resources. Complete linear ordering of the resources. And as I said, we will let agents negotiate in this way, and here what is the constraint that we put on our agent? We'll just say that, okay, you can just exchange, agents will be able to meet in a pairwise fashion, so only 2 agents, and you can just exchange your resource with the resource of the other one. No money? We repeat until we get to a stable allocation, meaning that no contract is possible within the society of agents. No more contract, no more deal is possible. And in the end, we want to assess the quality of allocation, Pareto optimality or utilitarian and egalitarian optimality. So I said that we just assume a ranking of the resource. Of course, here we have cardinal notions, so to get something meaningful, we'll put points on the different positions in the ranking. Okay, so now this is, I think, the most interesting part of the talk. Because if you don't know, you will learn a bit about French cheese. Sorry, this is... So, you have this house market with 5 agents and 5 cheese. So agent 1, her preferred cheese is Camembert, here. Then you have Roquefort, position 2, which looks a bit like Stilton, but it's sheep milk, it's not. Stilton is it sheep or? No, I don't think it's sheep milk. It's cow, I think. Then you have Maudet, Well, it's not only French cheese, I have to say. And you have goat cheese, second, and you have Gruyère. Okay, so it's much more diverse than I thought it was. So again, Camembert, Roquefort, Mimolette, goat cheese, and Gruyère. Okay, in the initial situation, Agent 1 has got the Gruyère, Agent 2 holds the Chèvre, Agent 3 holds Camembert, Agent 4 holds the Mimolette, and this one holds Roquefort. So now how can they deal? They can deal if in a pairwise fashion they can agree on a swap. So for instance, I don't remember which one okay, so for instance, agent 2 and 3 can agree on a swap. Why? Because I've got the goat, you prefer it, so I could give it to you, okay? And you've got the camembert, I prefer it, so both of us are fine. And this is a mutually improving move for both of us, okay? So they could do that. So that's the first step of the negotiation. That's a contract involving two agents. They swap their cheese. And they are better off. So that's obviously a Pareto improvement. Then agents 3 and 4 could also swap their cheese, because agent 3 says, okay, you have the mimolate, I prefer it, and then agent 4 says, you have the goat cheese, this is my favorite cheese. Okay, they swap it. Then agent 1 and 3 could do the same, Gruyère and mimolette. Okay, and then finally agent 1 and 2 could also do the same, leading us to a stable allocation. So this is stable. Why? Because you don't have any more possible swap deals between two agents. You can check it. I will not do it, but it's obvious. They almost have their preferred cheese, all of them. So it looks like a good protocol. Actually, we get to this nearly optimal, it seems, allocation. If we compute the utilitarian social welfare, it's 22, 5 plus 4 plus 4, and so on. The points, different points. If I check, this should be egalitarian here. So the utility of the worst of, yeah, that's 4, because no agent has anything which is below that rank. So that's not bad. But of course, you could say, well, you choose this sequence of deals, but it could be that in a different scenario, a completely different sequence could occur, and maybe it will take us to a completely different outcome. Is there any guarantee that we'll reach the same outcome? No, not at all. We can start from the same situation and pick some random deals and do differently. For instance, here 3 and 5, and then 2 and 4, if I'm right. And then we get to this allocation, which is also stable. This is also a stable allocation. But it's not as good. It's not as good. If you compute the utilitarian social welfare, you get 18. And if I check the egalitarian, I have 2, because this agent 2 has got the goat cheese and it doesn't like it so much. So, what can we say about this protocol in the end? Is it good or not? And is it the case in the first place that we reach a Pareto optimal allocation? So could it be the case that with this protocol, I could get stuck in a stable allocation like this, but that there would be a Pareto dominating allocation over this stable allocation. Yes, I see people nodding, and they are right. Indeed. Why? Because, well, it's very restrictive. We just have deals among two agents, just swaps. But it can be the case that to make your improvement, you would have to involve more agents. So, for instance, you could have a cycle of 3 agents to improve. So, for instance, here, you could have this situation, and there's no way that you can improve with only 2 agents, but you could have a contract involving the 3 agents, which would take you to this allocation, which is better for everyone. Maudet, goat, cheese, Gruyère, whereas this one is Pareto dominated, but it's stable if you just restrict yourself to swap deals. Okay, so it looks like allowing more agents in the process to do contracts gives you more power. It's obviously the case, but the price you have to pay is that negotiating between 2 agents, that is easy, and also agents meeting peer-to-peer, this is easy, but coordinating more than 2 agents becomes awfully difficult very quickly. So if you want to agree on a deal with more than 2 agents, it gets much more difficult. And of course, if you have even more agents. So before I mentioned this notion of price of anarchy, which is a measure of how far from optimal we are in a stable situation. And I would like to ask this question now here in this setting. What is the price of anarchy of this protocol? So how far can we be from the optimal allocation using this protocol? So again, what does it mean? It means that I would like to be able to quantify. You see here, I had an example where I had this, but if I were to compute the optimal allocation of this cheese among the agents centrally, I would get a different allocation, and there is a gap between this centrally computed optimal allocation and my stable solution. I would like to be able to quantify this gap in the worst case. So what is the worst situation that can occur? The price of anarchy, this is the formal definition, so that's the max among all the instances of the optimal allocation over the mean of some symbols that I did not introduce, but at the top this is the optimal allocation, and under the ratio this is the stable allocation. So that's the ratio, so that's the max among the different ratio that you can have among the optimal allocation and a stable allocation for this protocol. Well, now look at this. If my protocol respects individual rationality, then this price of anarchy must be at least 2, meaning that the ratio must be 2 at least. Why? Look at this. I have a situation, the white situation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say allocation 1, and I have allocation 2, the yellow allocation, where 5 is here, 1, 2, 3, 4 are here. Okay? In terms of social welfare, this is a much better allocation. This is almost the best item for everyone except the second item for this one. So if I have n people, that's about n squared, right? That's very good. But if I start from this allocation, here, this diagonal, white allocation, I will be stuck in this allocation. Why? Because the only way that I could move to the yellow allocation would be to do a deal involving all the agents, where by a cycle this one should exchange with this one with this one, this one with this one, and this one with this one. But here this one would block, because this one has got his preferred item to start with. So this one would never agree to move to allocation yellow. And doing that, you would completely make it impossible to move to allocation yellow, because the only deal which would take us to yellow would involve him, but he's happy with this, and so he would keep 5. Okay, so this one could never deal with him, and so on and so on, and the other ones could not deal together. Right, so we have this, so it means that I have a situation where I can be in a stable, or in an allocation where I cannot move if I respect this rationality principle, but still I am at a ratio of 2y2, because this would be a social welfare of n squared over 2, because you can do the sum of these different values here, and that would be half of the, well, graphically it's obvious. Okay, but maybe it can be worse than that. Maybe it could be that I am stuck in an allocation here, which could be even worse than this ratio of 2. And, well, actually, no, it's not the case. So, as long as I allow agents to deal in this, using these swaps, what's going to happen? If I am in a two-stable allocation, so in allocation where it's stable for deals involving 2 agents, then what does it mean? It means that for each pair of agents that I can consider, okay, at least one of them, if it's stable, then no deal is possible. Okay, so if I take any pair of agents, at least one of them should put the resource that the other one has below his current resource in his ranking. And this is the case for all the different pairs that I have in my system. So I can just count this, okay? And so by just counting the number of pairs in the system, it's about n squared over 2, so the ratio is 2. So to put it differently, and this is the same for all the protocols that would involve these deals among agents, these contracts among agents. So again, what does it mean? It means that I am guaranteed to be at least at a ratio of 2. So if the optimal is 10, if I use this protocol, then I'm guaranteed that I will get at least 5. Okay, it cannot be worse. But I can never guarantee better than this for any procedure, for any protocol using individual rationality, given the instance that I just showed here. Okay, I could never get a better guarantee because of this. And so, incidentally, it also shows that in the worst case, the size of the cycles that you allow does not make any difference. in the worst case, you always have this ratio of 2, which can be a bit surprising. Of course, in practice, if you allow 3 agents, 4 agents, and so on, it will improve the result. But in terms of worst case results, it would not make any difference. Okay, I think I will skip this. Well, this is the same type of setting, but now with money, and we did some work with colleagues in this area, and a couple of results that, if I have time, I would like to show, but it's not as important. Okay, I'd like to say a few words about negotiation on networks. There is a theory called network exchange theory, which is very nice and not so well known. So just a few words about this. Suppose you have agents allocated on a graph. So here the graphs means that an agent can deal with another agent if it's a neighbor of this agent on the graph. Okay, so A can deal with B, B can deal with A, D, and C, and so on. And now suppose that each agent can reach an agreement with at most one of his neighbor. And the negotiation that each agent would do is to divide €1. So again, each agent can make an agreement with one agent, and they have to divide €1. So for instance, A and B could decide to divide 50-50. And if this is the case, B could not make any deal with D and C. And so only C and E could deal together, and they could decide on some division of the resource. So how, if I had this this network, how the negotiation would occur, would unfold? How would the money be divided?
Object, which is a small black triangle, and classify it in his ontology.
Well, actually, experimentally,
And then he will ask to the other,
we get to something which is about this. B has much more power given his situation than the other ones, because he can deal with this one, this one, this one.
no correspondence with this.
And so
So they will go one step up, and then there is a correspondence.
B would use this power to agree on something very favorable for him. So I take everything, you take nothing, or I take 1 minus epsilon, if you like, and epsilon for the other one. C would very soon see
So we don't do anything, and this is
that he would not get a good deal with B, so he would focus on E. So he would actually be in a position which is a bit symmetrical with that of E, who also only gets one option. And so they would evenly divide the dollar in that case, okay, 50-50. Why? Because C has more options, but very soon C will realize that B will just trade with A or D and will get something out of them, so he would focus on this. So this is how the situation would unfold in practice. Let's be a bit more precise about this. In that case, an outcome is a pair M, where M is actually matching, so which agent agree on the deal, and alpha X is the values for each agent. And it has to be the case that in this matching we divide $1, so alpha X plus alpha Y has to be 1, has to sum to 1. And alpha X is 0 if you are not in in the set of agents which are matched. And here we have this notion of stability, which says this: an outcome is stable if for each agent his alpha x is better than his beta x. And what is beta? Beta is the best alternative that the agent could get in the network. So what does it mean? It's 1 minus alpha y of the other neighbors that x has in the network. So if it's stable, if for all agents it is the case that the share that I have is better than what I could get given my neighbors on this network.
You've got the random part at the beginning,
Okay, sorry, it's a bit late for this. So, for instance, if I take 50-50 here, is it stable?
So basically, you see the convergence rate here, and here you see the exchanges. That is how it is correct. And the pity is that it's a bit more correct before, because they are basically incorrect correspondence, which are not correct, but which are covering correct correspondence. So the fact that F measure balances, you have this kind of effect.
So no, it's not stable.
As you have a bit more failure, then you
Here, A is not in any deal, so he has alpha of 0. Okay? So this agent has alpha of 0.5. Okay? But if he looks at A, he says, okay, A has alpha of 0, so that's beta here would be 1 minus 0. So intuitively he says, okay, I have 150, 1.5. I could almost get 1 if I traded with this guy here. This guy has nothing. I could just propose, for instance, epsilon. I would get 1 minus epsilon. I'm better off. This is not stable. So I would move and trade with this one. And similarly, this C could do the same reasoning. I have 150. Well, this poor guy is not in a position to negotiate with me. I will propose 1 minus epsilon and so on. Right? So this is not stable.
It is the same value is an artifact of the simplicity of this game. It's not predicted by the theory.
Yeah, so for instance, as I just explained, B could deviate. He has alpha B is 150, but he has beta B of 1 because of A. A bit more intricate is this one stable? So now all of them are in a matching, whereas before only 2 of them were matched. So all agents agreed on some deals, but is it the case that it's stable or not?
These are 2 repair systems based on similar.
No, it's not stable again because this one, for instance, could say, okay, I have 1/2, but if I would deal with him, I could get more because, okay, he has just 1/4, so I could deal 3/4 with him. So my alpha C is 1/2, but he has a beta C of 3/4. So he could deal. Could get a better deal. Or the same for B. B could say, I have 125, but I could get 0.5 with C. So it's not stable. B and C have an incentive to deal together. Now, this one, I just swapped the value here.
And this one now would be stable, if I'm right, yeah. So no incentive. And this one would also be stable. B and C have no incentive to get together. They have 1/2. So now the funny thing is that so this stability notion is not enough to actually reproduce what we see in experiments. So if you look at experiments, B and C have more negotiation power. So I will not get into much detail about this because it's getting a bit late, but just to tell you how it can be explained. So very interestingly, these people introduced the notion of a balanced outcome, which is an outcome such that actually alpha x and y is the Nash bargaining solution that we saw at the beginning, but considering that the beta x and beta y is the conflict point, okay? So you take the alternative as being the conflict point and you compute the Nash bargaining solution with respect to that solution, to that conflict point, sorry. So that's interesting, but it's not so easy to compute actually, and it's a fixed point definition, and you get into something that is, in terms of algorithm, not so simple to compute. Well, so it was just to show the intuition, but so here, if we computed this fixed point definition, we would get something which would be more like this. So 2/3 for B and C. Okay, again, so it reflects that B and C are in a better position. And again, the intuition is that it computes the Nash bargaining solution, taking as the conflict point the alternative that agents have on the network. So many interesting questions, and for those who are interested in theoretical computer science, there is this stock paper by Kleinberg and Tardos related to this, so all kind of questions in terms of algorithm, complexity, and so on. And I would like to conclude with some negotiation on meaning, which was not so clear to me at the beginning what it could mean. No. And then I knew a bit about the naming games, but I just read a bit more about that. So I'll just like to introduce naming games and also an approach based on negotiation for ontology alignment. Because when I thought of, okay, now I showed different negotiation techniques and so on, we saw that agents can have different preferences and so on. But so how much of it can we really use if we talk about negotiating some meaning of, does it make sense to assume that agents have preferences over the meaning of words or things like that? It's not so obvious to me. So read a bit about that, and just to give you two extracts from the literature. So one is by Baronkeli, but I think citing Luxteals, who says, by definition, it's not possible to define all the needed communication conventions and ontologies that robots will have to build up and negotiate their own systems. So robots will have to build up and negotiate their own communication systems, situated and grounded in ongoing activities. I think that's the kind of things that kind of citations you can be familiar with. But what does it mean exactly to negotiate this convention? So naming games is a kind of game involving this aspect. And more recently, I came across this work at AMAS last year, I think, of Terry Payne and Valentina Tama, who asks this question: so how can agents align ontology that they do not want to disclose, that they would need to agree on correspondence they believe to be the most relevant, solve ambiguities, combinations, and so on. But they would like to, well, sorry about the cut and paste, copy and paste. They will have to minimize the communication, and maybe they don't want to just fully disclose their ontology and just let the central authority process a given alignment for them. So there has to be a more interactive process going on, and they have proposed a quite interesting protocol that I will very briefly describe. So naming games. I don't know, maybe it's completely familiar to many of you, but I'll give the basic rules and show how it's analyzed in the literature. So in this game, each agent has an inventory set of terms. Initially, this is an empty inventory. These terms are associated to object. I will assume next that we just have one object. This is without loss of generality. So agents meet again, only two of them at the same time. And when they meet, one is the speaker and the other one is the hearer. So it's yeah. Battery. I can. You can use this one. Okay. Conclude like a politician trying to. So vote for me. Yeah, so it's asymmetrical. I'll try to do something a bit more. So how does it work? You have this process where first the speaker will picks a word from his inventory, okay, at random, or you can have some weights and so on in more elaborated models, but initially just randomly pick a word. If the vocabulary, if this inventory is empty, you just make up a new word for this item that you have to find a word for. And then you communicate this to the hearer. And then the hearer will check whether she has this word associated to this object in her inventory. If this is the case, then both the speaker and hearer will erase all the names except the one they just communicated. And otherwise, the hearer will just add the word to her inventory. Okay? Simple process. And this is based on this paper by Baron Kelly and a couple of other authors, 2006. So assume we just have one object and we have this initial situation. So importantly, this basic model assumes that all agents can communicate with any other agents. Okay, so this is a process allowing any agents to communicate with any other agents. No network, as I discussed, although they did study some network aspects later on. So first, we have this initial situation where you have to name a given meal, and you don't know this meal. So agent 1 has two possible terms, haggis or some pudding. Second one would call it gleu or azopif, and so on. The process would go like this. agent 1 could communicate with this agent, okay, and could pick the name Haggis. So the hero would check in his inventory, okay, there is no term Haggis. So applying the rule that I just gave, he would just add this to his inventory. So we just add Haggis. Now, given this, we have a second, well, this is just random, picking randomly pair of agents. So now we have this agent with this agent. This one pick Azopif, you would communicate this with this one. Agent 1 doesn't know Azopif, so he adds Azopif to his inventory. Then this one picks Haggis. The hero sees that Haggis is in her inventory, so they both delete all the terms except Haggis. So we just get to this. Now this one communicate with this one, saying, well, pick Haggis because that's the only term that I have. The other one knows Haggis. This one communicates with this one, Haggis, doesn't know Haggis, adds Haggis. This one communicates, picks Haggis, knows Haggis. And they get to this agreement that this should be called Haggis. Okay? Maybe it's interesting to note that even at this point, it could be the case that there's no guarantee that we will converge to Haggis. So that it could be a sequence where Azopif gets selected. Of course, it's unlikely at this point, but it could be the case. So we have actually only one stable and absorbing state, absorbing in the sense that once you are in this state, you do not get to any other states or stable situation. And this is only the situation where it's coherent and that everyone has only one term in his inventory, and it's the same for everyone. Okay? By contradiction, if it's not the case, so if for instance, all agents have all different, they could have different terms, but the same inventory, it's not stable because they could pick a term, select, and they would shrink their inventory, so it's not stable. And if they have different terms, of course, it's not stable because you can take these two agents and they would add this term to their inventory. So there is only one stable situation, this coherent state where all agents have the same word in their inventory. So I just actually answered to this question here. There is no other absorbing state. But are we sure that we will reach this absorbing state at some point? Well, it's a reachability question that we would like to guarantee, and yeah, in the long run, this is the case for probabilistic reasons that can be shown to occur with probability 1. Why? Because there is always, from any state, there is a way to reach this absorbing state. For instance, by this sequence, that you have a single agent, it will talk with all the other agents twice, using the same word. So first, he may, the hero may learn this other term, but then in the second interaction, they will just agree on this single word. He will talk to all these agents, and if we apply this sequence, then we get to this absorbing state. And this sequence can happen, can occur with some probability. So asymptotically, there is probability 1 that you will get to this absorbing state. Of course, in practice, it's interesting to see what happens and how quick it is, and what kind of phases you come across. And this is what they did. So this picture is directly taken from their paper. It's an experiment with 1,000 agents. to understand the dynamics. So the matrix that they have is the total number of words in the system, total number of different words, so different words, total number of words, and then different words for n of d, and the success rate of interaction. So if agents agree on the term, it is called a success, otherwise it's called a failure. And so they compute the success rate at each given timestamp. So here, what do we see?
We can imagine that we are
Pointer.
working in this way.
Save me.
Some level of description. And what would be my goal is to be able to deal with agents working in this way, okay? In order to improve their communication when they encounter a problem. Okay, so where does
I think I'll just move to the.
how to fix it, etc. Like the naming game is the first brick for cultural evolution of language. I would like this, what I did with alignment Reaper, is the first brick to knowledge Reaper. Okay. So I will summarize. Impressive. So this is something that heterogeneity is here to stay. And there will be many ontologies, and you cannot decide that it would be different. It would be really bad if you ontology and alignment is very capable to cope with this heterogeneity. It helps us to have bridges across our ontologies. It can be provided with model theoretic semantics, allowing to better interpret this and to deal with this in computer. And this allows also to support revision operators for when you encounter inconsistency. Okay. So this is nice, but as we have seen with Acomo and Logmap, these are relatively blind. Okay, they have no reference to.
So some of them they were able to explain analytically, but for some other behavior, it's mostly experimental evidence. So that's what I said, that very early you have the number of different words, which increases in the system, then you build correlation, then you have a phase transition to the coherent state. So that's very interesting topic, I thought, related to this distributed way of negotiating, in a sense. Of course, each single step is very simple negotiation, but still it's completely distributed and very yeah. And I have to say that I read a couple of papers about this, but there is much more. I was impressed by the number of publications related to this topic, so maybe you know much more than I on these topics. But to give you some ideas, so for instance on graphs, they did a lot of studies on different types of graphs connections, and they included other parameters like adding probability of success, and in some case it is the case that you have the emergence of two different terms under some conditions, so not a single one, but in some versions of these models you have different conventions coexisting in the system, which is not so obvious, so they had a nice study about this. And to conclude, I would like to say a few words about this Amos work that I came across on ontology alignment by means of negotiation. So here they define correspondence as a mapping between two entities. So one is given in the source ontology, one in target ontology, and an alignment is just a set of such correspondences. And the thing is that each agent will now associate a degree of belief to each correspondence, which in their terms its likelihood of being included in some alignment. So you can think of it as an agent having different sources and saying that, yeah, it's quite likely that this should be included because I saw that this is very trustworthy sources, so it's better than this other one. Yeah. And then they propose a protocol to align ontologies. And the key thing is that they want to avoid full disclosure of the beliefs. So each agent is equipped with a private knowledge base, and they have an estimate of the others, which again in their terms reflect the maximum degree of beliefs that an agent has in its undisclosed correspondence. I will just show the example and not get into much detail. But so here, what do we have? We have then you have a negotiation which proceeds in rounds, and in these rounds agents will exchange moves by communicative acts, like in agent communication, and as we saw before in different protocols. You have assert, object, accept, and reject. So assert is I assert that this correspondence, this is the case that we have this correspondence with some degree of beliefs. And the interesting thing is the objection. So if the agent finds in her basis that there is some candidate for better correspondence, he will object to the current offer, and he will try to propose this new offer, new correspondence, which again can be contradicted by the other one, and so on. So this is where we have this negotiation process. So at the beginning, Alice's estimate is 1, meaning that according to Alice, the best degree of belief that Bob can have for some correspondence is 1, and for Bob it's the same. So Alice will pick the best correspondence for her, so that's BZ, because it's 0.9, and she will assert it, okay? And Bob computes the joint value given his own private value. So this is 0.45. But now he thinks that it could be the case that there is a related correspondence. Why is it related? Because it involves also B. Okay. The previous one was BZ, but now there is BX. And it may be the case that it's better because if you compute the average value, what he thinks value for better, then it thinks it may be better to propose better than the one you proposed. So and so on. So Alice now can do the same, compute some value, see that she has a better option eventually and so on, propose an alternative, and then in the end she will accept and they will agree on some other correspondence and so on. There is more in the protocol involved, and there is a bit more technicalities, but the basic idea is like that. So you have this iterative process, and you have this incremental disclosure of information, which is interesting. I saw that they experimentally validated their approach. I'm not enough familiar with the community and type of ontology alignment to say whether it's, but it seems to be good from the paper. And that's about it. So thanks for your attention.